camera is not on. Right. Mic is on. That. Morning, everyone. Welcome back. We'll do a guided meditation in a few minutes, but I'm going to give a little more time for the world to wake up and log on. But I will continue to discuss some of Rudy's teachings. We ended our discussion last night with the emphasis, the clarity that Rudy was so adamant about, which was, of course, our own inner practice. And in a very significant way, to use the meditation techniques that we've been given to truly come in contact and establish ourselves in this flow of energy inside ourselves. That internalization of our awareness, the using of our breath, attaching our awareness to our breath, and turning inside, turning our life force back inside, and to direct that into the psychic body, into the central channel. Therefore, understanding that what we are doing is, in fact, to use Rudy's work, we are nourishing our own psychic muscles. I often describe the psychic body that most of us find when we ultimately find it. It's a little bit like finding some rusty old 1909 tractor that's been sitting out in the defunct cornfield, being rained on for years after years, and it's a classic, but you can't just get in there and turn the key and have it start, because it's all rusted up, it's all solidified. And so as we begin to turn inside, as we begin to bring our awareness and the energy of our awareness with our breath inside, then what you may experience, what we often experience, is the thickness. We don't automatically, if you will, feel that dynamic surge of energy, that dynamic flow, and as many of us perhaps don't even feel the heart that we're trying to feel. And that's okay. It's actually fairly normal, because our heart, our psychic body, is a lot like that tractor. We haven't used it in a long time, sometimes for lifetimes. And so what we're understanding that this baseline for our developing of our internal capacities. As Rudy said, that we come to allow these higher energies to properly structure themselves within us. Right? That first we have to come in contact, feel that the thickness, the lack of mobility, if you will, in our psychic bodies, and simply begin to lubricate it, to begin to add a little oil here, little there. We don't take a sledgehammer to it. We don't throw it on, light it on fire, right? It's a subtle caressing, but it's a diligence of attention. That intent, of course, is in a certain way what we're talking about when Rui was discussing with us and emphasizing that wish to grow, because perhaps as we begin to tune into this inner apparatus, and we can't really feel the energy, we can't seem to get it to start to move, then it is the intensity of our attention that begins to just let the thing start to breathe. If you will, let our own inner mechanism, which is frozen, respond to our intention. So that attention, if you will, is the directing of our awareness, the directing of the energy of our awareness into or towards, onto this density that we feel, this thickness that we feel, this heart that we cannot feel. And just keeping our attention there. Keeping our attention there. And if you like, if you wish, you can use the wish, that intention, to penetrate just by being inside yourself, being as still as you can, feeling your heart, feeling where your heart's supposed to be, and just that simple asking. Just that simple asking. And okay, if it means asking again and again and again and again and again, 8 hours a day for 8 years, to finally get this thing to open, then it's worth it. I've often described my first encounter with Rudy in class was this, like dynamite, nitroglycerin. When he looked at me and my heart that I did not know I had exploded. And this openness that was always there, but not available to me because of my non-use of my own heart. So I was very lucky in my encounter with Rudy that the intensity of his energy, the power of that transmission opened this thing in me. But what I will say was that honeymoon lasted for about 2 months. This extraordinary openness that took place in me. All of a sudden, one morning, I woke up and I said, where in the fuck did it go? Where is it? I could not find that same openness that the day before and the day before that and the day before that was so effusive. I had to do the same thing that I'm suggesting that we all have to do, is just sit down, turn our attention inside, and look past, look deeper than the place in us that cannot feel that heart. Let our intention penetrate into and call forth that openness. This is the power of the wish, as Rudy was suggesting to us, that it's the most powerful force in the universe within a human being. And as we said, that same intent, our own individual intent, our own individual wish, has within it the same pure power of divine intent. And that's why we can understand that finding that wish, even when we don't have it. Just sitting and asking if that's what it takes, asking and asking again, is such a powerful and imperative part of our practice. And as I said last night, that same intent, that same longing is already awakened in us. We may not feel it. We may not know that's why we're sitting in, have come to sit in front of some weirdo with bald head or some beautiful woman with long hair. That by that descent of grace, this longing wells up in us and propels us to discover it in ourselves. Propels us to find the energy, the nourishment that fuels that longing and activates that opening. That same divine intent, that same primal urge to express freedom is the power in your own wish. So we'll stop and I'll lead you through a guided meditation. This will be a guided meditation around the double breath exercise, and there's somewhere in your book there's the written out, so you can look at it later if you want, right? Which is just the basic, structure of it. But I'll guide you through a meditation of turning our awareness inside, using the wish to open, using the double breath to make contact with that energy and flow inside, and then hopefully in the developing of that capacity with our eyes closed, we can create the capacity that with our eyes open in the face of whatever, in the face of our life, that we can stay established in that flow of energy inside. So we'll have our meditation now. So close your eyes, please. Thumb and forefingers together, palms facing up. If you're sitting in a chair, your feet are on the ground. Your back is erect but relaxed. You're centered over your pelvis. Just be aware of your body. Lift your shoulders all the way up to your ears. Hold them and drop them. And just start to feel the rising and subsiding of the breath. And the meditation that we'll do is intended to use the double breath and to integrate that double breath with our wish to grow and to feel this flow of energy in ourselves, all in one singular, smooth process. Just let yourself become aware of the breath. And just be in tune with the arising and subsiding of the breath. And as you follow that cycle of the arising and subsiding of the breath, notice how your mind and your thoughts start to be simply absorbed into that breath. And your awareness is more deeply inside yourself. And just notice how that breath arises and subsides from the heart. And just let yourself fall into that heart. And feel the openness. And if you wish, you can ask. You can use your own intent and whatever your own words. I wish to open. I wish to open my heart. Just let that wish penetrate deeply into yourself. As you hold that wish in the heart, feel the expansion and the spacious openness is taking place. Open to that openness. Let yourself be centered in that heart. And let go. And from that heart, from that center, from that openness, draw a breath into the heart. And feel the breath and the energy of that breath as it subtly expands the heart from which you're asking. Let go. Let go again. When you do your meditation, stay in this part of the exercise till you really feel a deep stillness, deep sense of openness in the heart. fluctuations of the mind seem to dissipate. Let yourself become centered in the heart. From that center, draw a deep breath into the heart. Draw the breath in and let it fill up and expand. There's no pressure. Just feel the fullness. And as it reaches its apex, let go. At the end of that out breath, let go again. Use your meditation every day to start your day from that place of openness. By working in this way, and as we begin to use the double breath as part of our meditation, we're not using the double breath to open us, but using the double breath from that place of openness. Take the time in this part of the exercise to feel the shift, to feel that you are deeply centered. There's a spaciousness and a stillness in your heart. Whenever you're using your breath, particularly in the use of the double breath, it's never a pressurized breath. It's full, but it's never pressurized. There is never a forcing of openness. There is this subtle intention for that openness and the allowing of that openness to take place. But you can understand that it is your breath and your intention and the energy of both that we use to penetrate into ourselves. And by that, asking, by that intention, we can make a deeper contact with that inner wish that's drawing into itself our own sense of our own wish. We begin to merge that divine intention with our own. Draw a deep breath into the heart. Draw a deep breath into the heart. Feel it energize the openness, then let go. Draw another breath into the heart. You're breathing through the nose, and as you breathe, feel the breath and your awareness move into the heart. Feel it open and feel your chest and relax in the heart and just feel the expansion that's taking place. Hold your breath there for 5 to 10 seconds or until it naturally releases. Draw the breath again into the heart. Feel the energy and the expansion there. Feel the openness. Hold the breath for 5 or 10 seconds. And now as you release only about half of the breath while staying in the openness. Keep your attention in the heart. Now breathe in again into the heart, into that breath that remains. And breathe down, collecting that breath and your awareness that's in the heart and bring it to the navel. And feel the energy expand in the navel chakra. Hold the breath and your attention there for 5 or 10 seconds or until it naturally releases. And as you release the breath, feel the energy naturally expand across the sex to the base of the spine. Relax in the base of the spine and allow the energy to rise up the spinal column to the head. And feel the energy as it rises there. Let go. We'll go through it again. Take a breath into the heart. Hold your awareness and the breath there. Feel the openness expand. Hold it for 5 or 10 seconds. Release about half the breath, retaining the awareness and the heart. And breathe back in again, into the heart, into the openness of the heart, and direct your energy and your awareness and the breath into the navel. Feel the belly is soft, but the navel expands. The navel chakra expands. Hold 5 to 10 seconds, or until it naturally releases. And as it releases, feel the energy as it moves across the base of the sex, to the spine, to the base of the spine, and rises. And let go. In a meditation period of 25 or 30 or 40 minutes, whatever your natural cycle is, you use the double breath 5 or 6 times only. The double breath is intended to direct the energy and the breath and your awareness, and to begin to connect, to create, connect to, and establish ourselves in that flow. When you're not doing the double breath, just keep your awareness in the heart. Keep your mind still and in the heart. Just be in that openness. Just let the fullness of that openness pervade your own awareness. And the more practiced you are at a meditation like this, the more you'll be able to then reside in that openness. You'll be able to connect to and feel that flow inside. And as you begin to cultivate that capacity of feeling that flow inside as part of your meditation, then again, stay with the meditation. Use the double breath a number of times to begin to, again, feel a shift even in your experience of that flow. A deeper flow inside, a more connected flow. At all stages of the meditation, let go, surrender. Surrender inside and allow something deeper and finer to fill you. Surrender inside and allow something deeper that's already present within you to open and fill you. It is this ever deepening practice that mobilizes our own energy to facilitate a profound and lasting change in our consciousness and in our experience of life. And at the end of your meditation, bring your awareness back into the heart again and feel the gratitude. Be grateful for the extraordinary possibility that we can open our own heart. And then as you open your eyes and as you move through your day, remain in the center of the heart. Let the fragrance of that gratitude be ever present. As you move through your day, remain centered in the heart periodically throughout your day. Use the double breath meditation to deepen that openness of the heart and to further strengthen the flow inside. And become practice in that capacity. And from that capacity of being within this inner flow within ourselves, then you can extend from the heart. You can make contact heart to heart with the people that you say you love and even those you don't say you love. You can experience an openness with everyone and anyone. You can begin to feel this dynamic flow between you and the people in your life. You can feel this dynamic flow between you and your own life. And that horizontal flow then allows you to draw energy back into your own heart, back into your own flow, and nourish and increase its own capacity. And as you move through your day, when you notice that your heart's not open, take a breath and open your heart. When you notice that you're not connected to that flow inside, take a moment, a few moments, use the double breath to reconnect to that flow in yourself, and then move again throughout your day. It is this dynamic interchange between discovering that openness and that flow in ourselves and sustaining that openness and that flow as we engage our life and the conditions of our life that strengthens both the internal vertical flow and this, if you will, this, quote, external horizontal flow. Take a breath into your heart. And feel the gratitude there. And let that gratitude permeate your awareness. Let your mind be saturated by that awareness and that gratitude. Let it fill your body. Let go. So I'll see if there are any questions that you'd like to ask about the meditation. Someone had asked the question last night uh, that didn't respond to, which was basically, what do we do with thoughts when they arise? Do we not put them into the flow? And yes, we do. And the way that we, if you will, absorb our awareness that's been beginning to externalize into thought is simply take a breath, come back to the heart, and just let the energy of that thought be the energy that you use to open the heart, and come back to that center. And if it's a really stubborn thought, you can use the double breath to process it in a stronger exercise. Because understand that thought is simply is while it is a dynamic of awareness. And so what we're attempting to do as we draw our attention back inside to come in contact with this deeper awareness is to not be caught in the content of thought but to draw our awareness, the energy if, of that's thought, back into the heart so that we can find a deeper awareness. And it is from that place that we can then, at once surrender this immediate need to act from thought that generally gets us into some troubles, right? And be quiet with it. And then if some message, some intuition, some clarity that seems to start to happen, that you're, if you will, reading or deciphering through thought, then you can be much more confident that there's some, I won't say purity to that thought, but that there's certainly some non-discursive dynamic of that thought. And so by drawing the energy of thought back inside, and if you will, turning it back into energy inside, then what you'll notice is the need to act from thought is deeply dissipated, and then it's the if you will, the thoughts that we need to really act on, we can understand them as really a deeper intention. Usually the problem is that we have a thought and we believe it, and then we seek to prove it's true by our actions. Be willing to surrender the thought. And even the meditation that we just did, the power, if you will, in the double breath is in effect the yogic process of surrendering thought by drawing the energy back inside, and, if you will, purifying that thought so that, if you will, it becomes pure thought. There's lots of discussion in tantric tradition of discursive thought and non-discursive thought, or more simply put it, pure thought and non-pure thought. And you can just, in a simple way, you can understand what thought does to us. I'm a horrible person. No, I'm not horrible. I'm using that as an example. is a thought that many of us may have. What does it do for us to enliven that thought is, in fact, to prove that, in the sense that now the very belief, the very deep experience within us that somehow propels us to have that thought is energized. Versus, I am God. Look at the difference. What happens to you? So pure thought, impure thought, one of the things that you can kind of use as a metric about it is it life affirming? Is it revealing truth in us, the highest truth? And then therefore we can be a little more detached from our thought, a little more objective about our thought, and we can also decide which thought we want to energize. The thought, I am a horrible person, is a thought construct. You may be a horrible person. There may be some aspect of you that's a horrible person, but that is not your true essence. So our we are never. It's never a denial of these different shades of light in this, from light to dark. It's never a denial of that, but it is the conscious choice, if you will, to engage in the deepest, purest thought within ourselves. And what you'll find is the clouds of all this self-rejection, which manifest as thought, simply, or they just move on by. And the sky becomes clear. As soon as we act from thought, we're really acting from a superficial dynamic in ourselves. And by not acting, we can at least draw back in self, and we might see that this thought, I am a horrible person, is really arising from this deeper samskara in ourselves, this deeper contraction in ourselves, which is this profound self-rejection that so many of us find ourselves in. So rather than beating the thoughts, like, trying to stamp out, ants, right? Come back inside, and you may discover that the deeper message that was in that thought, if you can go inside and be quiet, is that what it's really happening is that it's a very superficial way of a very deep place in ourselves trying to reveal some misunderstanding in ourselves. And all of that, all of even these profoundly deep dynamics of self-rejection in ourselves, this profound doubt that we live in ourselves, they're all part of the fundamental misunderstanding of our own consciousness. And our sadhana is, in fact, the intention to free ourselves from misunderstanding. Because it's only in freeing ourselves from misunderstanding that understanding becomes clear. But it's never about taking a sledgehammer to your own misunderstanding. It is about understanding where that misunderstanding, how it usurps our own awareness and ultimately drives us into very limited and usually self-serving action. And if we just are quiet, we just draw back, then we can begin to see these deeper dimensions of our own misunderstanding, and just keep moving through them. Just keep moving through them. In all untruth, there is the foundation of truth. This is one of the really, truly wonderful ways in which non-dual practices, which gives us a clue, non-dual, translates into not two, right? Begins to help us understand that all of life is this multiplicity of expression of energy and awareness and consciousness. And that by becoming quiet inside, by becoming still inside, by becoming centered inside, we can look out through that multiplicity, recognize that multiplicity, whether it's the world, the multiplicity of our mind and emotion, right? And we can understand again that they're simply waves on the ocean of consciousness. And that we do have a choice, a God-given right and choice to engage whatever dimension of our self that we want to. And the discipline, the inner discipline that Rudy talks about, I talk about it quite a bit too, right? Is that choice, the discipline of choice. From the highest perspective, you can understand that that choice, the term in non-dual practice is called vimarsha, self-reflective capacity. That self-reflective capacity is the other side of the coin, if you will, of consciousness, of pure consciousness. The term is called prakasha and vimarsha. Prakasha is the light that illuminates life. The light, and that vimarsha, that self-reflective capacity, is the capacity of that consciousness to know itself as that consciousness, as opposed to not knowing itself as conscious, which is called unconsciousness, right? And I'm not getting into that level of discussion with us here, except that I want you to understand that choice, our choice, is that God-given capacity to choose our experience, to choose our inner awareness, to choose the level of this spectrum of consciousness that is ourself, to choose which dimension, or which depth of that spectrum we want to live and function from. So I'll stop and see if there's any questions before we go on for a little more longer, and then we'll take a break in a bit.
So there's actually quite a few. Most of them are, actually, I'd say almost all of them are pretty technical.
Okay, well, you're the boss of the questions,
Okay.
so you get to decide.
Okay. Maybe I'll start with some of the ones that aren't. Let's see. So.
Well, maybe start with the ones that are technical,
Okay.
because it's important that people
Sure.
understand the mechanics.
Okay, so Lisa Gongster asks, for the double breath, do we inhale up the spine or do we inhale after we move the energy to the head?
Hi, Lisa. How's your puppy? So in the double breath, so you always want to be breathing through the nose, but so the breath into the heart fills the heart, and then as you release and draw the breath back in to the navel, then the release of the breath and the energy is a release, not another breath. And so what we're allowing, so is the second breath, if you will, that we've filled the kunda, the base, right? We'll talk about that more, right? Is on the release of the breath, what you want to do is, while yes, there is a physical release of the breath, what you really want to do is to feel the breath release and the energy release and move to the base of the spine and rise. So we're not using another breath to try to drive the breath towards the spine or up the spine. Is that answering the question? I realize it takes a moment for her to.
I think it should. And actually, there are a few questions that kind of touch on the same thing about
Okay.
that.
And then if that didn't respond to Lisa, she can respond, and I'll respond to the response, and we'll be here all day. But nowhere else to go. All dressed up and nowhere to go. Yes.
Shri Srinivashan and
Srinivasan.
Srinivas.
Hello in India.
Says, Dear Nadaji, can you speak a little more about what we do between the double breath cycles? Do we simply keep it at the heart or also circulate attention down the front and up the spine, particularly on days when I have a hard time feeling flow? Is it helpful to move attention down the front and up the back? Or do we simply set our attention at the heart and let the flow reveal itself? And someone else also asked about the navel, like if we.
Okay, so it's a little bit of it's circumstantial, in the sense that right during your meditation, and particularly during the day, always remain in contact with the heart. Feel the heart open, right? And you can use your breath. You can use, the specificity of the double breath if you want to try to move that awareness from each chakra to the next, or to establish that flow. Or you can simply bring your awareness there without, if you will, doing the full double breath and breathing here, doing this, boop, bop. If you feel your heart is open, then just bring your awareness into the belly, into the navel, right? And you can use the breath if you want there, but you don't have to go through the whole double breath exercise, right? So you are attempting to begin to create the capacity to feel that flow. That flow is, while it has a sense that we're creating it, it is ever present within us. And so what we're doing is tuning our mechanism to be able to feel it and to come in contact with it. And ultimately what you're wanting to do is to be able to permanently establish yourself in that flow. And so whether you're breathing or not breathing, which is, by the way, the maturation of the double breath, we'll get there, right? Whether you're consciously doing the double breath, etc., or not, you want to be established in the openness of the heart, established in this flow of energy inside. And as the more you, quote, practice being established there, the more you'll be established there. And that will create within you the strength to not be pulled out of the heart as you engage some dynamic, some difficulty, or some difficulty, right? So what you're trying to do is to create this permanently establish yourself in that flow. And as you'll see as we move through the weekend, that flow is the flow of energy that we feel in the Sushumna, the first dimension of the central channel. So down the front and up the back to the Ajna chakra. But we'll not get ahead of ourselves. Okay?
Yes, and F. Kush says, I tend to run short of breath by the time I get to the base of the spine and need to draw another quick breath down there in order to release it upwards in the double breath.
I mean, that's okay, but what I recommend that when you start to feel, when you're, if you will, holding the breath in the navel, right? As soon as you start to feel that binding, that pressure, right, where you feel like you need to take another breath, then you can do one or two things or both, right? Which is just relax into that. Relax the pressure, right? And what normally will happen is that just that simply allows the breath to naturally release, right? You don't really want to try to breathe down anything. When you're short of breath, to try to breathe into the shortness of breath is, yeah, I don't think that's what you want to think about, right? So the point is, don't hold it so long that the pressure becomes the point where you feel you have to take another breath. But also understand, the term is called kumbhaka, the retention of breath. And so in a sense, it's like lifting weights. And I don't want you to get the sense that, well, just, get a timer out there. Well, gee, I held my breath for 1 minute and 12 seconds there. Meanwhile, you passed out, right? Right. The kumbhaka, the holding, the retention of the breath, is the expansion of the boundary of the breath. That's also expanding, if you will, the boundary of the container for that breath. I've described Rudy a lot. You can't see him, but you can see him in the front of him. Rudy had this gigantic belly, right? Even Nityananda, you can see, had this gigantic belly. He was a small little Indian boy, right? And yet he, at some point, had this massive size. That was the breath. That was the fullness that was created in him. And Rudy, I used to walk down, we'd go early in the morning, about 6 o'clock. He would, when I was in New York with him, he'd wake me up, and we'd go walking through the streets of New York City, when there was no traffic and stuff. He loved to do that, right? The lights just coming up, and he would be walking down the street, and the best way I can describe it is he was so centered in his belly. He was so full in himself, and he was like those huge street cleaning machines that are going through, cleaning the machines. He was just drawing in this energy, and there was such a stillness to it. There was just a fullness, right? And so the point is, it's a developed capacity. And you may find I can really only hold my breath for 6 seconds before it just starts to get too pressurized. Okay, never force it, right? But at the same time, the developed capacity is when you feel that pressure start to build, let go, but don't let go of the breath. Let go of the boundary of that breath. And what will happen is you'll start to feel this sense of like that. Okay?
Ava Chaush
Hello, Ava.
actually asks, do you have any tips for establishing do you have any helpful tips for establishing a flow with others, or productive tips when we feel they are sucking the life out of us, or giving out energy that we perceive as negative?
And this sounds like a conflict, but if you remain centered and open in your heart, nothing can hurt you. Nothing can penetrate into you. In fact, so much of the time we get involved in a difficult situation, and the first thing we do is close our heart. So when I say open the heart, I mean remain centered in yourself. And yes, then if there is some negative force coming at you, then one, you're centered enough to recognize that. Two, you're in a capacity to be able to take the energy, not the content, if you will, and use it to further open yourself. And if you find that it's just too much, then do the old Michael Jackson moonwalk. Just back on out of there. It's okay to recognize our limited capacity to deal with strong energies. So that's the conscious choice. If you find yourself engaged in a very difficult situation and it simply contracts you, then you can, well, as Bruce Lee said, you can practice the art of fighting without fighting, right? You just be open, and then if you can't process it, then don't engage in that. And well, it's my mother, it's my father, right? It's both. You don't have to engage with your mother and father if there's too much tension from them, etc. If you're not able to deal with it, you can simply excuse yourself. And you can even say, look, I can't deal with this right now. But understand also that the capacity to deal with strong energy is a developed capacity. And so it's not that we want to just run away from every difficulty that we're facing. We're not like pythons that can swallow an animal whole and then digest it. Maybe we just have to take little bites at a time. Take a bite, run away, come back, take another little bite. Right. Okay?
Zoe Z asks, I feel lots of tension rising up, and it's hard to stay immobile during the last meditation. Is that normal? What should I do? Let my body move or try to stay still? Thank you so much for your help.
You're very welcome. Well, it's hard when you can't have a just direct dialogue because of the time delay. But look, there's a natural, often what can be understood as a kriya, whereas this energy starts to open us, then there's some kriya, some reaction. So if that's what's happening, the energy, if you will, is just kind of vibrating the body, and that's one thing. If you feel tension arising, right, then that's probably different, which doesn't mean that that's bad. Because look, this energy is purifying us. Rudy once said, Kundalini is the burning of lesser things, right? Meaning it is purifying this density. It's purifying the thickness and the contraction and the energy that's not in motion. And so sometimes you're going to feel this kind of tension build up, right? And just try not to don't push on it, but just let the energy begin to open it or dissolve it, and like that. And by doing that, you can take another breath. But again, we're never using, our meditation, our technique, or our breath, or the energy to force an opening or to ram something, open. Anytime you start pushing on something that's closed, it's going to close more. So last thing I'll say about that's pushing against it is very different than penetrating through it. Okay?
Erica Ash says, I experience anxiety or lots of seemingly negative energy in my root chakra as I drop the energy into my base. What is the best way to support releasing this built up energy?
So again, as we begin to pour a little oil on this rusty tractor, right? Well, the first thing we're going to notice is the constriction, is that it doesn't move, doesn't begin to turn over. That's a good thing, right? Just keep with a subtle energy, if you will, just kind of keep moving the energy on it, and let it slowly untie it. So that anxiety, that tension, that nervousness, whatever it is that comes up, right? It's part of the natural kind of, it is the energy that's bound. And so what it's going to do is naturally you'll begin to feel it as that bound energy in whatever dynamic it expresses itself, fear, anxiety, etc., right? And so you can begin to understand that it's not, if you will, the effect of the energy, right, that we want to try to fix. We want to put the energy that's surfacing or expressing itself as anxiety or tension or rejection. We want the energy to begin to move. Contraction is energy, not in motion. Okay? Well, then last question on this, and then we'll take a break.
Funny enough, the next question was, can you touch on...
Can we have a break? I gotta pee. Could you shut the fuck up so I can go pee? Okay, last question.
Can you touch on how to use the double breath with a contraction?
So again, what we're wanting to do is to use the energy to, if you will, to wash over the contraction, to wash over the density. So that's one way you can think about it. So you feel this rock in your heart, you feel this rock in your belly, right? Just try to keep the energy soft, but just let the energy wash over it and wash over it. So you get this outer shell, this really dense thing that's happening, and while in one sense it's the deeper inside that is the more the contraction, but it's sometimes just this outer shell, if we just let it kind of get softened, then the whole thing can open up. So that's one way you can think about it. And in a sense, that's what part of what we're really trying to do when we talk about being established in the flow, is so that this flow is kind of, it's like a waterfall that's, or a river that's moving over boulders. It's slowly diminishing that boulder until at some point there's no boulder there, right? Now that's why that's the part of the power of feeling this flow all day. It's washing over boulders in your psychic mechanism that you aren't even necessarily aware of. The other way that you can do this is when you feel that boulder, again, you're not pushing on it. You can just, like a laser with that energy, without it being forceful, just penetrate through it into the center of the contraction is one way of thinking about it. Or the other is to penetrate through the contraction. So you're think of it like creating a pinhole for the energy to move through this ball of tension, right? And then that energy begins to move through and open it up from the inside. Okay. Great questions, and I think we'll stop. It is now 11:29 by my watch. We'll come back at 11:49 by my watch. So 20 minutes. Don't be late. Welcome back. So I want to continue going through. Camera's not on. So I'd like to continue going through some of our discussion of some of Rudy's essential teachings. So if you turn your page to page 7, your book to page 7. We talked about this inner discipline, and we talked about it a little bit already a couple times about extending from that place of center, extending from that flow. So this discussion says at the top of the page, extending that disciplined consciousness into daily life. It says the essential nature of a human being is that a person can make conscious choices. You have to constantly relate everything you do to the basic question of what you really want in your life. To not take advantage of all the things that are available in this world as a means of conscious growth is to accept the limitation of one's ego and one's own defensiveness. To use everything is to allow what exists to guide us to our ultimate destination, to free us from our own limitations. When you can surrender everything, you can enjoy everything. Certainly, one of the strongest messages, teachings, emphasis that Rudy gave us in our life, those of us who were able to be with him, was that this recognition of our deepest self cannot just happen, quote, internally. It can't just happen in our own awareness as we sit on a cushion, etc. But that in fact it is through the proving of that awareness, the proving of that capacity by engaging the world from that capacity, and in fact increasing that capacity as we engage the world to create this flow with life and to use the energy of all circumstances, the energy of all engagement to deepen our own capacity, to deepen our center, to reveal to us the deeper dimensions of awareness within ourselves. And so when he talks about it frees us from our own limitations, that is so much of the value of our engagement with the world. Because we all know and all experience that our interpretation, our experience of the world is most often driven by the particular level of consciousness in us in which we're engaged in that world. If we're engaged in the world from the most extreme dualistic perspective, there's me and there's the world, then we're reinforcing that experience. We're reinforcing that misunderstanding, right? Because we're engaging from that dynamic, from that perspective. This is certainly very powerfully emphasized in non-dual practices. for the apparent reason, the obvious reason. There is no separation, there is no distinction between the world and ourselves. There are not two. There's not us and the world. There's this pure field of consciousness in which we are part of that dynamic multiplicity that consciousness is expressing itself. And so it's not in any way to try to obfuscate diversity. But not to be bound in it. That it would be like looking at a giant tree and saying, well, the trunk is the tree, and that the leaves and the beautiful flowers are not part of the tree. There was an amazing photo on Facebook yesterday of an elderly woman standing next to a rhododendron tree. The rhododendron tree was over 100 years old. It was like the size of this 2-story, 3-story building, and she's this little bitty image at the bottom of it, right? She had planted the tree. Now, I don't know what age she was when she planted the tree. 6 months old, 10 years old. Point is, she clearly was well over 100 years old, right? It was an amazing photo. I never knew that rhododendrons could get that big, right? But the point being is that, to deny all this multiplicity, to somehow say, as some traditions say, it's an illusion, it's not real, is to say that rhododendron is only the trunk. Well, it's only actually the life inside the seed that is the true essence of life. That pure stillness, that pure awareness. Crack open seeds. At some point, there is only space inside it. And inside that space is the shade of the tree. That's part of a Rumi poem. And so to in any way try to disengage from the world, or to deny the world, or to not recognize the multiplicity of the world is only to reinforce dualistic consciousness. That does not mean that some of the branches on that rhododendron perhaps have bugs. Perhaps it has rot. Does not also mean that every one of those seem like thousands of flowers that were on this tree at some point aren't going to wither, quote, and die and fall away. What happens when the flower falls from the tree? It starts a new life. Inside from that bloom is the seed of itself. And so what Rudy is trying to help us understand here is that we must use our conscious capacity, our conscious choice in life to make conscious choices, which does, in one sense, we have to translate it and understand that because we have that choice, because we have that capacity, it is in making conscious choices that allows our life to further blossom. If this young woman who planted the tree would have, as it began to grow from a little plant, began to pour acid on it or whack on the leaves, etc., then it probably would have stunted the growth at best, right? and killed it worse. It's so important that we understand that our life, that the choices we make in our life should support the deepest intention of our life, which is to know the God that dwells within us. Which also means that we, in that conscious capacity, sometimes make choices in our life to not do something that does not support that highest potential within us. And we can talk about the whole range of that, from what we choose to do with our life force, whether we're driven to make money at the expense of our own inner awareness, but all the way down into just this kind of internal dynamic of ourselves, where we continue to choose to be bound by our own limitations, to be bound by our mental and emotional constructs. That is a choice that we can make. We all know the incredible, painful power of thought and emotion. It's not to deny that, the reality of that, but it is to understand that we can choose in every dimension of our life our own inner experience. And particularly what's important in this context is that we understand that if God's purpose is freedom, and we are not separate from that God, then the purpose of our life is to know that freedom. And our conscious capacity to recognize our own limiting our own self-imposed limiting factors to that, then that's where we make the conscious choice. Whether it's the pursuit of some thought, of some deep wound, or some insane need to be famous or to be rich. And the thing that's important that we understand in that conscious choice is that self-reflective capacity gives us the mechanism, to recognize where the impulse is coming from, to recognize whether this impulse, this incessant drive, if you will, to have lots of money in order to make us feel full, we can recognize where that's coming. It's coming from the place of incompleteness. And there's that lovely quote, "There's never enough of that which does not satisfy." And we do this in our lives so often. The current relationship we're in isn't the one that we know is going to fulfill us. And so we dump the duck, right? And we look for another duck. Our current job is not the one that fulfills us, so we reject that and we find another job. Our current life is not the life that's bringing us fulfillment, and so we reject that very life to find a different life. How are you going to find a different life? The point of conscious choice is to recognize that we so often, we could say most often, until we don't, make choices from a place of limited understanding. The antidote to that is to be still. The antidote to that is when some impulse arises, particularly when you find it has this driven intensity, particularly to get something or to change something, that we can say, hold on there, Baba Louie, and we can just pull our energy back inside. And we can pull our energy back out of the action that's erupting out of that thought, that need, and we can just pull back inside and get still and surrender it. When you can surrender everything, you can enjoy everything. It is not a denial of anything in our life. It is not a denial of having some wealth in our life. But let's be clear about what metric we're measuring wealth. Right? The point is that there's nothing wrong with having in the world. There's, if you want to use that term, a lot wrong with needing something in the world that reinforces this need that's driven from incompleteness, which is the fundamental experience of separation. And by not acting, by not grasping, by not reaching, by not demanding, we're able to at least pull back and start to see where that sense of incompleteness is coming from and penetrate deeper than that to find the place that is not incomplete. So often we're like, in whatever one of the major rivers that feeds Niagara Falls, and we're just pedaling as fast as we can with the current because we got to get there, right? And because we're so driven to get there, and we at some point realize, holy shit, right? Instead of exit stage left, right? Instead of paddling, using our own energy to paddle away from that place, which is going to be a disaster for us, we just keep going because we're so driven by this misunderstanding of incompleteness. And if we're quiet, what we will know, what we can come to know, is that all desire is incompleteness. All desire is incompleteness when it's driven from, when it's need instead of the expression of fullness. So then whatever we want in our life, whatever richness, whatever dynamic, whatever career, whatever notoriety, whatever it is, right, is not a problem if we understand that we're attempting to simply express the fullness in ourselves through that as opposed to fill that incompleteness. Rudy was an extremely wealthy man at the end of his life. As I said the other night, to support his spiritual habit, Rudy became an art dealer and was truly one of the top three, one of the three of the people on this planet that basically brought Asian art into the Western world. They had warehouses full of extraordinary antiques that certainly now are worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. At the time of his life was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars instead. He once went to Mumbai on a buying trip, and he was introduced to a new dealer that he hadn't dealt with, and this person had a 7-story building. This was towards the end of his life. And Rudy goes, he meets the guy, he starts walking around the first floor, and he's there about 5 minutes. And he looks at the guy and he says, "I'll take the entire building." All the contents of the entire building. Didn't even bother to go up, right? Because he saw so much on that first floor, that was worth the money that he was willing to pay without seeing all that stuff. He died about 9 months later, and for years we were dealing with these shipments of people, this guy unloading all these different things, right? Rudy used to walk around with a wad of $100 bills, big roll of them like this in his pocket. He never gave me any of it. I shouldn't say that. He helped me start my own art store, handed me $500, right, and then a few pieces of art. The point is that wealth meant nothing to Rudy, in the sense that it was not the fulfillment of his life, but it was the expression of the abundance of his life. And he did not give it to us. In fact, when he passed, his mother received it all. A lucky mother, right? The point was, he was not prepared to give us something that probably would have distracted us at the time. He had given us his entire life force. He had given us this portal into this living spiritual force, and that was what he knew was going to be valuable to us, to carry us and sustain us in our life, right? And he probably was right. At age 20, if we'd have received all this money, we might have gotten a little bit distracted. I would have liked to have had the test, but that's not really the point. So want everything in your life. Don't need any of it. And have the honesty in yourself to know the difference. It's really one of the most critical dynamics of our spiritual life is that we choose our life in support of our spiritual intent. So that our spiritual freedom, which we say it might be a little valuable, is not given second place to all the other things of our life. And if that translates into the sacrificing or the surrendering, if you will, of some dynamic in our life, some choice that we're about to make, then this is our conscious choice, which doesn't deny us the possibility or the right or the God-given ability to choose everything in our life. But at the same time, suggests to us, be conscious of what you're choosing. That's what he means by page 7. Turn to page 8, please. Aha. So on this page, it says relationship with a teacher. Rudy says, a great student is one who can open the teacher by the depth of his wish and effort. Let me repeat that. A great student is one who can open the teacher by the depth of his wish and effort. The student must be conscious of the psychic relationship that exists between him and his teacher. If there is a true intention on the student's part to grow, they are accepted by the teacher. Upon acceptance, he or she becomes part of the teacher's psychic root system. This is the highest pattern of growth, as it takes place in another dimension, and the nourishment of the grace of the teacher is continuous. If the student is in a state of surrender, the entire energy of that teacher is at their disposal. The person who attains this relationship will experience the highest grace, but must still perform the inner work necessary. God's gift of grace is the first gift. The next gift is the ability and willingness to change through consciousness, discipline, gratitude, and surrender. As I said yesterday, I quoted from this ancient Kala text that said, "There is but one Guru, the illuminated rays of awakened consciousness transmitted to us through an initiatory lineage." That's the teacher that Rudy is talking about. But at the same time, we understand that the access to that energy, the access to that living spiritual force, is almost always given because we come in contact with a vehicle of that spiritual force. I'll reiterate what I said because it's really important in this context, that when that Shaktipada takes place, when this descent of grace takes place, there is this twofold dynamic that happens within each of us, where this longing erupts or slowly seeps out within us. But that longing impels us, propels us to find the energy to fuel that longing. That longing is God's intent to reveal himself in us. It is God's longing that is awakened in us. It is the God within us that awakens its longing to know itself in and as us. And it calls forth to itself the very energy that, if you will, nourishes, to use Rudy's term, that fuels that longing in its revelation that longing is seeking. My own experience in finding a teacher happened when I wasn't looking for one. I'll tell the short version. So, once upon a time, in a galaxy far, far away, in a place called Odessa, Texas, there was a young man. making a living by selling substance. And at some point he was out of substance. And so his friend, who was his partner in substance dealing, went from West Texas to East Texas to a town called Denton, where a few people that are watching are sitting still to this day. And so as this partner went there to buy some substance, I'm sitting back in Odessa calculating how much longer can this $4 last so I can buy some crackers for my meal, right? Hope Bob comes back soon, right? So my friend somehow gets distracted as he goes to Denton because the people who he was normally buying these drugs from said, you know, I want you to go to this place with us. It's called an ashram. And says, okay, why not? Do they have drugs there? So my friend goes there, and he comes into this room, and there's this massive, gigantic, fat, bald man sitting there, eyes wide open, and bodies were flying everywhere. And it was just all this energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he got so distracted that he, that evening, drove back to West Texas and forgot what he was about to do, right, while he was gone there. Now, you have to understand that I grew up a Methodist. We sang nice songs once a month on Sundays, right, at church. I kind of had declared myself, quote, an atheist when I was in high school because I thought it was kind of cool, right? So there was no sense of anything in me wanting to know God, any longing for know God, anything like that. Quite the opposite, in fact. My friend comes back, and he tells me about this man that he had met. I say, okay, yeah, that's fine. That's nice. Where's the drugs? But the amazing thing that happened was that within 3 or 4 days, I woke up and all I could do was think about God. Where's this coming from? But this intensity was there. I started doing hatha yoga 4 to 6 hours a day. Our friend Nichani or Pratibha or any of Laura who teach yoga, if they had seen a video of what I was doing, would not call that hatha yoga. Because this was Odessa, Texas in 1970. There was no books, there was no yoga teachers. But just spontaneously I started doing that, accompanying this intensity of wanting to know God. Where did that come from? It came from the grace that had awakened something in me and had magnetized to me Rudy, even though it came to me through this intermediary. So that continued to grow and grow and grow. Shortly after that, I was invited to leave Odessa, Texas by some very nice men. I went to Colorado, and this thing continued. I started doing different hatha yogas. I met a few spiritual teachers. Nothing really clicked. So after about a year of that, the person I was living with at the time, who happened to be from Indiana, we decided we'd go back to Indiana. Maybe we'd get a little money from our parents. So we go there. About the third day after we arrive, I'm walking down the street, and this, like radar thing. I'm walking, and all of a sudden I look over, and I see a picture of a giant, fat, bald man. And I said, holy shit, that's who my friend was talking about. He never knew his name, right? Never knew his name. I looked at Rudy. He looked at me through those eyes. That night I went and I met Rudy for the first time. And in fact, the photo that is in your book on page 5 is a picture of Rudy the first time I met him. And I think he was looking at me because that's the exact angle that that I was sitting in. I was sitting in front of the stage that he was sitting on. And somehow, amazingly enough, 5 or 10 years ago, this picture surfaced. But the point is, that was my contact with my teacher. That was my contact with that instrument of that living spiritual force that's transmitted through an initiatory lineage and was the if you will, the kickstart of my own spiritual life, my own sadhana. It's particularly in this day and age with lots of unfortunate dynamics with spiritual teachers having take place, or at least more known. Probably these kind of weird dynamics have gone out through history as long as there was teachers and students. Of teachers becoming seduced by the very power that is flowing through them and all the unfortunate dynamics that take place from that. But I will say to you that my sadhana and whatever level of mastery I've achieved in that is the result of that contact with Rudy. As I've said, Rudy died 18 or so months after I met him. He's more alive in me today than he was then, and more alive today in me than he was yesterday. There are many traditions that pretty much state categorically that our spiritual liberation in almost all cases is not possible without a relationship with the teacher. Within the non-dual tantric practices and Kundalini sadhana, where that realization, where that discovery of our highest essence happens through the liberation of Kundalini. Within that context, which is the practice and the teaching that I do, right? It is understood that when we talk about the awakening of Kundalini, there are different dimensions, there are different phases of that. What I call the arousal phase, right? Then the awakening, and then the liberation of Kundalini. That awakening only takes place because a guru awakens the Kundalini in us. Now, whether that's your experience, or you believe that or don't want to believe it, I'm not here to convince you of anything about that. But in the context of the discussion that we're having this weekend, which is this uncoiling of Kundalini, and the recognition of that as this innate supreme power in us, that it is coming in contact with that living spiritual force that, if you will, does awaken us and then fuels that awakening to blossom into a deeper realization within ourselves. Rudy was a person who had extraordinary value in the recognition of that, the power in that relationship. He had his own teachers. He absolutely credits those teachers with the freedom that he ultimately found in himself. Understanding the teacher simply as the, if you will, the intermediary, the one who introduces us to God. And after that, then you just play poker together. I always loved being with Rudy because we'd go to class and we'd have these cosmic experiences, right? And then a few of us were lucky enough. He lived in a brownstone and there wasn't really an ashram there. That was upstate New York. So only about 5 or 6 of us could be there at a time. So we'd go upstairs, he would make dinner, and then we'd play poker for a few hours together. Of course, the Shakti transmission didn't stop because we were playing poker. So we were either playing poker or he's sitting there watching either the Dick Van Dyke Show or Gunsmoke while we're sitting there watching him and he's continuing to give transmission. If that extraordinary statement from the Kaula Sutras is true, perhaps even if we just want to believe that it's true, right? Perhaps if we want to just at least suspend our disbelief and begin to open and engage and allow that living spiritual force, which is ultimately only the force of God and that supreme power, to unlock our self. This is the power of that relationship. This is what Rudy means when he says a great student is one who can open the teacher by the depth of his wish and effort. Because ultimately, then, it's not the teacher that's important. It is our own effort. It is our own willingness to drink from the well that's been given to us. And at a certain point, we begin to truly understand the extraordinary magnificence of this inner spirit, this inner life, this divine Shakti in us. And that the awakening of that within us is what brings us to liberation. And that for most people, that does not happen without the energy, the guidance, and sometimes consoling of our teacher. Whomever your teacher is. If you don't have a teacher, find one. This is my advice to you. But don't take my word for it. There's a great, there's a wonderful quote by Lao Tzu that we've all heard, and probably most of it didn't realize it's from Lao Tzu, that basically says, when the teacher is ready, the teacher appears. Certainly was my case, except I didn't know I was ready. What makes us ready is God, is this grace. But there's a second part of the quote that says, when the student is ready, God appears. When the student is ready, God disappears. Sorry. When the student is ready, the teacher disappears. Meaning the whole calling forth of a teacher of this energy field to us has a singular purpose, and that's to provide us with the energy, the nourishment, to have that direct experience in ourself of that divine Shakti, of that divine awareness. And that is the singular purpose of a teacher. And any teacher that tells you that that's not their purpose, run away. Or if there's some other purpose that they're trying to convince you of, that's why you need them. The singular purpose of our relationship with the teacher is to know God in ourself. And after that, we just play poker. We'll keep going. Number 9. Oh, page 9. Rudy says to us, living in a state of unconditional surrender. I love this one. Tension is always the expression of limitation. Surrender is the expression of ability. We must come to understand that it is only the ability to surrender that allows for higher energies to properly structure themselves within us. I think he said that about something else earlier. Only then can we understand the perfection of life, of human life. It is the simplest of all things, but it takes a consciousness that allows this simplicity to manifest. We are endlessly trying to tell this energy where and how it should work, rather than allowing it to reveal itself. In our journey back home, in the stages of the progression of our own freedom, of our own discovering the highest truth within ourselves, what in the non-dual tradition is discussed as the upayas, as the means. The simple discussion of that is this triadic path, the path of effort, the path of energy, and the path of awareness. We talked a lot about that path of effort in ourselves, that wish, that feeding that wish, that opening our heart, that cultivating this capacity to live inside ourselves, which is a snippet of that whole discussion. But that brings us into this place where we truly make contact with these deep, powerful, intrinsic spiritual energies within us. And that, quote, second phase of that progression is called Shaktopaya, the path of energy. And it is the surrendering and to that energy that propels exponentially our own growth. Surrendering to that living spiritual force that might happen to flow through an embodied person or a non-embodied person, right? Surrendering to the energy, that inherent intrinsic energy that is not something that's put into us, but has been that's ever present and is being awakened in us, and truly surrendering to that Shakti, which is the energy that frees us from misunderstanding. It is the energy that frees us from the experience of differentiation and begins to bring us into this true experience of non-differentiation that begins to dissolve this sense of I am separate from God to I am God walking. The tensions that we experience is our resistance to that energy trying to free us. Whether that tension, which coalesces into patterns, which coalesces into samskaras, and which ultimately form these knots in the psychic body, it is all the limitation that we put on God's energy with our mind. So that's why we say tension is always the expression of limitation, the limitation of misunderstanding, and the self-reinforced misunderstanding, and that it is our willingness to surrender that is not a weakness, but in fact is the highest strength. And it is in the surrendering to that Shakti. It is in surrendering to the very power that gave you life, sustains your life, and fuels your own consciousness that the expansion of our own consciousness and the capacity to deeply realize our true essence begins to really blossom. One of the things we'll talk about later is the breaking through of these knots of misunderstanding, particularly the one in the center of the head. Those knots are giant hairballs in this channel for Shakti within us. But it is in the willingness to surrender to that energy that is, if you will, working inside us to free us. That is an imperative at some point in our life. And the surrendering of all of the limited capacities that we have in ourselves, all the limited awareness, all the tension, all the thoughts that bind, all the needs that bind us, etc., and to surrender all of that, so that so that this energy can reveal to us that same misunderstanding, so that we can surrender it. Amazing. The tension is our unwillingness to surrender to that energy and the limiting consciousness that we're bound in, instead of surrendering and recognizing that we are being freed. We resist, we close, we run away, we choose something else. Let's keep going. Because Rudy continues with this important topic on page 10. It says, ... living in a state of unconditional surrender. This is such a amazing statement. You must transcend and surrender all resistance. It is not what we wish to give, but what is needed that is the right formula for growth. The need for continual surrender and rededication to our spiritual values must deepen continually and allow the absorption of our life force. This enables the eventual spiritual realization that we are pursuing to take place. This surrender acts like a dredge that cleans the harbor, where silt has filled and blocked the flow of the channels. Our ordinary life washes into the depth of our wits all the superficial material that can only be removed by consciously digging out this slow, accumulating resistance. If we are able to feel a new depth in our effort each day, it is only because we have removed this ever-collecting, deadly ingredient. It is never the obvious that destroys, but the subtlety of life that creeps up and into our being while we're busy looking for a dramatic effect. These dramatic patterns are easily dealt with because the nature of the emotional content automatically calls for a response. The subtlety of the silt does not evoke such a response. We are buried under it like some ancient civilization. The quiet death allows people to continue talking as if they were doing and attract to themselves people of similar disposition. They join together in underground worlds to keep their wishes from God, as all their energies are beneath the level of thickness of their own unconsciousness. Most frightening is that it allows for an innocence on the surface that only proclaims the lack of reality in our attitude towards our own ultimate existence. This silt is the greatest enemy of all spirituality. Buried beneath it is the masses of people who don't have the courage to fight for their own freedom. Holy Kundalini. In some sense, you could say, oh man, just go ahead and bury me. It's so heavy, it's so dark. But it's such an extraordinary insight into the nature of ego, into the nature of this profoundly superficial consciousness that most of us live in most of our lives, right? And so when he's talking about this silt, he's talking about the daily unconsciousness. That we come to our life with, the perpetual allowing ourselves to be driven by limited desire and limited need and limited misunderstanding. And it creates all this motion and it stirs up all this dust, all this silt, right? And it's like if you don't clean your house you leave your house for a year and you come back and there's this silt everywhere, right? And if you go away for another year, then you come back and the silt is a little deeper. And at a certain point, it cannot breathe. Your own consciousness cannot breathe. They're just little bitty particles, you know. And so for me, when I read this, I don't, there's not the kind of darkness and heaviness that you can immediately kind of have but this incredible insight into just how subtle our own resistance, our own holding on to our ego, holding on to our limited understanding, ultimately buries us. And that light that has awakened in us, the light where God took a match and lit that candle in our heart, can be extinguished if we are not consciously every day cleaning the house, if we're not consciously every day removing these deep coverings that are intentionally uncovered by that same spiritual force that's trying to free us. My experience in my own practice, certainly my experience in teaching for 50 years, is all of us come to this Maha moment. Maha means great. I'm trying to think of what was Dan Garrett's term? All of us come to some moment in our spiritual life where some profound rejection of that begins to take place. Yeah, what somebody who used to practice with me called the perfect contraction. I think he had it. This perfect contraction, in that it presents itself its own absolute truth that somehow is in opposition or in denial of this ultimate truth that's trying to reveal itself in us. This silt, this resistance that we're talking about, and Rudy talked about, I've talked about it at a while. And I said yesterday, Rudy said, if you're not meeting your resistance, you're not growing. Be deeply still in yourself and recognize that every little particle of silt, right, that we allow to accumulate is in fact beginning that process of extinguishing that light that God has turned on in us. And the conscious effort to be able to recognize that and then to take the feather duster, the energy duster, and to move it away is the conscious effort every day. And at some point, like I've been doing this for 50 years. As I would look back at those 50 years, I can certainly identify moments in those 50 years when that same dynamic was there, when I had to make some extraordinary some choice to choose the extraordinary, no matter what the cost to me was, whatever the sacrifice, in terms of my own holding on to my own misunderstanding, which is usually we can really say, I'm holding on to my understanding. Well, that's just the disguise. So we have to be willing, we have to be prepared to allow this misunderstanding to be exposed in us. This is part of the extraordinary gift of the dynamic of this Shakti that is rising up, expanding in us, and revealing limitation. Revealing limitation, not simply as in terms of our capacity to be aware and be in contact and be immersed in the Shakti that's moving in us, but the limitation of our own consciousness. This expansion, if you will, this rising of Shakti is always accompanying with the expansion of consciousness, because they're never separate. So read it to yourself a few times. We're going to continue because I want to get through these last 2 pages before we stop, even though we have 2 minutes. I'll talk fast like the FedEx commercial. So this whole discussion that we've been having, and this powerful message to us from Rudy about living in this state of condition, right, of unconditional surrender, should be bringing us to the next thing that he's talking about. Living in God's will and purpose. This is one of my most favorite quotes. He says, "Those who pick apart the threads of the fabric of life weaken the fabric of creation by applying their mind to the design, because to them, God's will is not acceptable as their own." Those who pick apart the threads of the fabric of life weaken the fabric of creation by applying their mind to the design, because to them, God's will is not acceptable as their own. We must first surrender to the miracle of creation, then the pattern will emerge. Life is composed of an endless variety of threads of many colors. The need to reduce them to a certain type of design constricts the creative output. All of the tensions put into the weaving is our own limitation of God's purpose. Double Holy Kundalini. If we take the helicopter up, if we find a room with God's view, and we understand, have this deep experience that the purpose of our life is God's own expression of the joy and the abundance of His own being, manifesting us and expressing itself through us and as us. If that is God's purpose, if that is God's will, then perhaps we should just say, well, maybe so. Let's see. Should my will be different than that? And even in asking that question, we begin to at least begin to question what we're doing with our will, which translates into the actions of our life. Is our will in alignment with God's will, which is the expression of freedom and joy and abundance? Or is our will somehow the intention to get something that we think we need in order to live in that joy and abundance? My suggestion to you is think carefully about this. Is your own life force? Is the use of your own will, right, bringing you closer to that simple joy of of your own being, that joy of abundance, that joy that's not created or diminished by condition? Or is it driving you further away from that? And then this life is not this is not my beautiful life, and we try to create another life. This part of my life I don't like, I need to change it. This partner that I have is not the perfect partner. They don't give me what I deserve, etc., etc. Begin to at least question the where the, you are using life force, which is driven by your own will, and where that will, whether that will is the desire from incompleteness or the will of the allowing of abundance to express itself. When we talk about tantric practices, when we talk about the upayas, when we talk about the path of awareness, it's also talked about as the path of Shiva, which is consciousness, but it's also talked about the path of will, but not our will. May thy will be done. And look, that will, that intent has a singular resonance, freedom and joy, and the form that's not that one form or another is not required to have or not to have in order for that joy and that abundance to be the expression and the experience of our life. So that tells us, have everything. It's not, it is the life-affirming understanding of non-duality. But have the willingness, the courage, the strength in yourself to at least stop every once in a while and say, what am I driven by? Do I understand the purpose of my life? And am I expressing that purpose? All of the tensions put into the weaving is our limitation of God's purpose. If you turn your page, he continues on page 12. Loving life, loving God. Rudy says, it is the inexhaustible capacity for freedom in every human being that I love and wish to nourish. It is the deepest expression of God and the only facet of life worth recognizing. Love is the vehicle through which God's creative energy flows. There is nothing in the world I wouldn't do for God. You have to learn to love God not just by opening one way, but every way. On the earth, the greatest way of contacting God is through love. You have to make yourself light enough inside to reach up to God. Everything that you do has to expand you. You feel the energy open your heart and you feel the energy going up to God. You have to raise your level of love so that that your love becomes an expression of God. What an amazing insight to come to in our life. That life is not about suffering. It's not about ending suffering. It is about coming in contact with the innate freedom and this divine love in ourselves that is the cause, the source, the cause, and the expression of our own life in the first place. Use your sadhana for that inquiry, to be able to look and see what is it that's what level of misunderstanding are we functioning from in ourselves that is preventing us from loving life and loving God and surrendering our will to that divine intention. And this is not philosophy. It is a lived experience that happens to us because we bring the true integrity of our wish into our life on a day-to-day basis, a moment-by-moment basis. And when we talk about realization, we talk about freedom, this is what we're talking about. The unencumbered capacity to love life and to love God. And all of its aspects. So we're going to stop now. We'll close our eyes for a couple of minutes. I've gone over my time. And then we'll come back and keep going. So close your eyes, please. So we'll stop for our lunch break now. We'll come back in 1 hour and 30 minutes, which will be 2:41 by my clock. We'll see you then.